أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم رسولا ونبيا رب أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك رب أن يحضرون ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Continuing on with the Prophet ﷺ's legendary government military legacy, the era of Sayyidina Umar ibn Al-Khattab, his life and times, his era. This will be video number 60. We have completed a total of 50 videos, the era of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq. It's also known as the Prophet ﷺ's legendary military legacy. Prior to that, we also have a total of 30 videos of the Prophet ﷺ's legendary military career. The book used for that was the Sealed Nectar from the Madani period. Then the era of Abu Bakr Siddiq continues from the time that he was appointed Khalifa, and likewise for Sayyidina Umar ibn Al-Khattab. We are now in volume 2, page number 312, 2.1, the Islamic conquest of Egypt. The conquest of Egypt is regarded as the third stage in the conquest of the major regions of the Byzantine state. Amr marched from Palestine to Egypt, ran parallel to the sea. He moved from Rafah to Al-Arish to Al-Farma, Pelusium, and his progress continued onward towards Cairo and then Alexandria. This shows us the military talent of Amr ibn al-As, since he chose this route, perhaps because the Byzantines did not have a heavy military presence along this route as they did in Syria, or perhaps because this route was known to Amr ibn al-As. The sequence of conquest was in the order listed below. 2.1.1 The conquest of Al-Farma, Pelusium. Amr headed west and he did not encounter any Byzantine troops except in Farma. But before that, the Egyptians had met him and welcomed him. The first place where fighting took place was in Al-Farma, where the Byzantines barricaded themselves in the city to face the Muslims, confident of their ability to defend the city and repel the Muslimin. After they realized that the Muslimin had come with Amr, were few in number and were less well equipped and were lacking in siege machines, Amr found out the number of Byzantine troops, their level of preparedness, and that they were many times greater in number than his troops. He had two options for the conquest of Al-Farma: either to attack and open the gate, or else be patient and wait until hunger forced the people to come out. The Muslims sieged the city intensified and the stubbornness of the Byzantines increased. The siege lasted for several months, during which some of the Byzantine forces would come out to fight the Muslims from time to time, but the Muslims killed them all. Amr would encourage and exhort the Muslims with powerful words, such as when he said, "O people of Islam and faith, O bearers of the Quran, O companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, be patient like men and be steadfast. Do not retreat. Sharpen your spears and protect yourselves with your shields and remain quiet, except for the remembrance of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. Do not do anything unless I tell you to." One day a group of Byzantines came out to fight a group of Muslimin, and the Muslimin defeated them. The Byzantines fled towards the city followed by the Muslimin, but the Muslims were faster than them and they gained control of the gate before the Byzantine reached it. The first of the Muslims to enter the city was Asmiqa, and it was an evident victory. It is worth mentioning that the Egyptian Copts who were in the city helped the Muslims and showed them the weak points. They welcomed the Muslimin in Atmida. After Al-Farma had been occupied, the Muslims destroyed its walls and fortifications so that it would not be of any use to the Byzantines, if Allah forbid. They returned to the city. Then Amr addressed his troops, saying, "O people, praise be to Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, who has granted victory to the Muslim army. Allah is great, who has honored us by Al-Islam, but beware of thinking that we have achieved everything we wanted, and do not let this victory make you complacent. There is still a difficult road ahead of us, and the mission with which the Caliph has entrusted us is far from having been accomplished. You have to be patient and obey your leaders. The people here will know that we are the troops of peace, so we should not cause any mischief in the land. Rather, we should restore it and set a good example of the teachings of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Amr was confident that the city was no longer good to protect any army that might seek shelter therein. He checked on his army to see what he had lost during the battle, and he was saddened to learn that he had lost some men who had been eager to conquer Egypt, but they had died before achieving that. He feared that if the battles continued in this fashion, he would not be able to reach his goal, but Allah Jalla Jalaluhu compensated him for those whom he had lost, and his army was joined by many men from the Arab tribes of Rashida and Lakhm, who lived in Jabal al-Halal. Amr and his army continued westwards, not encountering any resistance until they arrived in Al-Qawasid al-Assassin, from which he headed south until he reached Wadi at-Tambalan, which is near Tel Akabir. Then he continued southwards until he reached Balbis. The author of An-Nujum Az-Zahira said, then Amr advanced, meeting with only a little resistance until he came to Balbis. At Al-Babis, the Byzantines appeared with a large force, aiming to stop Amr from heading towards the fortress of Babylon, and seeking to engage the Muslims in fighting. Amr said to them, do not hasten to fight until we have discussed the matter. Let Abu Maryam and Abu Maryam come to me. At that point they refrained from fighting, and the two men went out to meet him. He called them to become Muslims or pay the jizya, and told them of the Prophet ﷺ's recommendations to treat the people of Egypt with kindness because of Hajar, the mother of Ismail. Muslims narrated in his Sahih that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you are going to conquer Egypt, which is the land where Hajar is used. When you conquer it, treat its people. You are going to conquer Egypt, which is a land where the qirat is used. When you conquer it, treat the people kindly, for they have rights and have ties of kinship or ties through marriage. They said that is a distant relationship. No one would pay attention to it but the prophets. Give us security until we come back. Amr said, one like me cannot be deceived, but I will give you a respite for 3 days. They said, give us more. So he gave them 1 extra day. They went back to Al-Muqawis, the ruler of Egypt, and Artabun, the Byzantine governor, and told them about the Muslims. Artabun refused and insisted on fighting. The Muslims defeated him and drove him and his troops back to Alexandria. It is worth mentioning something that is indicative of the Muslim noble attitude and chivalry. When Allah Jalla Jalaluhu enabled the Muslims to conquer Babylon, they found therein the daughter of Al-Muqawis, whose name was Armanushsa. She was close to her father, but she was visiting the city of Al-Babis with her servant Barbara in an attempt to escape marriage to Constantine, the son of Heraclius, whom she did not want to marry. When some of the Muslim army managed to capture Armanusa, Amr ibn al-As gathered the Sahaba together and reminded them of the words of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, saying, is there any reward for good other than good? Surah number 55, ayah number 60. Then he said, Al-Muqawwi sent a gift to our Prophet. I think we should return his daughter to him and all of her servants, and encourage whom we have captured, and their wealth that we see, and entourage whom we have captured, and their wealth that we seize. They agreed to that. So Amr sent her back to her father with honor, along with all her jewels and male and female slaves. Her servant Barbara said to her during the journey, O my mistress, the The Arabs are surrounding us on all sides. Armanusa said, I feel that my life and my honor are safe among the tents of the Arabs, but I do not feel safe in the place of my father. When she reached her father, he was very pleased with her and the way that the Muslims had treated her. The Battle of Danin. Ibn Abdul Hakam reported that Amr went with his army and conquered Balbis after fighting that lasted for nearly 1 month. Then he went to Danin, which is also known as Al-Muqassas. It is located on the Nile. The Muslims fought in an intense battle around it, and Amr sent word to the Khalifa asking for reinforcements. The Khalifa sent him 4,000 men. In charge of every 1,000 was a man who was as effective as 1,000 men. They were Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswad, Ubadah ibn as-Samit, and Maslama ibn Mukhallad, or it was said that the fourth one was Kharija ibn Hudafa. Umar said in his letter to him, remember that you have with you 12,000 men, and 12,000 will never be defeated for lack of numbers. The Byzantines came out with the Egyptians to confront the Muslimin, and a fierce battle broke out in which Amr ibn al-As used his military genius as Khalid ibn al-Walid had done in the battles of Iraq. He divided his army into 3 groups, one of which was to lie in wait for the enemy in Al-Jabala Al-Ahmar. Another was to lie in wait by the Nile near Danin, and the rest of the army was to face the enemy. When fighting between the two sides broke out, the troops who were lying in wait in Al-Jabal Al-Ahmar emerged and attacked the Byzantines, who broke ranks and fled towards Danin, where they were met by the group that was lying in wait near the city. Thus they found themselves caught between the 3 divisions of the Muslim army. They were defeated and their army destroyed, and some of them fled to the fortress of Babylon. Thus the Muslimin won this battle, and Allah protected them from the evil of their enemies by His grace. That was due to the brilliance of their leader, who drew up this brilliant plan which scattered the enemy forces. The battle of the fortress of Babylon. Amr and his army advanced towards the fortress of Babylon and besieged it. The siege lasted for 7 months, during which time Al-Muqawqis sent his envoys to Amr ibn al-As to negotiate with him. Amr responding by stipulating that he either become Muslim, pay the jizya, or fight. Al-Muqawqis chose to pay the jizya and wrote to Heraclius asking his permission to do so, but Heraclius did not accept that. He got angry, rebuked him severely, and summoned him to Constantinople. Then he banished him. When the conquest of the fortress of Babylon took too long, Zubayr ibn al-Awwam said, I am going to sacrifice myself for Allah, and I hope that Allah will grant victory to the Muslim thereby. Amr ibn al-As was besieging the fortress of Babylon. Then they climbed up the walls of the fortress at night and fought violently with the soldiers. The first one to climb the fortress was Zubayr ibn al-Awwam. He placed a ladder near the bird market, Suq Hammam, then climbed up. He told the Muslims to attack the fortress when they heard his takbir. Soon as Zubayr ibn al-Awwam reached the top and said, Takbir. Wielding his sword, he said takbir, and the Muslims outside the fortress responded. The people inside the fortress did not doubt that the Muslims had conquered their fortress, so they fled. Zubayr led his companions to the gate of Babylon and opened it, and the Muslims rushed in and seized the fortress by force. But Amr ibn al-As made a treaty stipulating that the Byzantine troops bring out with them only the supplies that they needed for a few days. The fortress of Babylon and its stores and weapons would remain as booty for the Muslimin. Then Abu Abdullah destroyed the towers and walls of the fortress. The conquest of Alexandria. Amr ibn al-As and his troops stayed in the fortress of Babylon for several months so that the troops could rest whilst awaiting permission from the Caliph Umar to proceed with the conquest of Alexandria. When permission came, Amr left a strong Muslim force in the fortress and set out with his troops from Babylon in May 641 CE, Jumad al-Akhirah, 21 years after Hijriya. He was accompanied by a number of Egyptian leaders who realized that their interest lay in supporting the victorious Muslim forces. They repaired the roads for them and set up bridges and places. The Egyptians became their helpers in their aim to fight the Byzantines. Amr preferred to travel along the left-hand side of the Nile, where the province of Buhaira is now, because the desert gave him plenty of room for his horses and troops and enabled him to avoid the many streams that would have impeded his progress if he had traveled through the Nile Delta. Amr did not encounter any fighting except a little at Marfout or at Tarana, as the Arab historians call it. Then he crossed the river to the eastern side at the fortified city of Nuqyus because it contained a strong fortress, and Amr was afraid to leave it behind and move on, but instead on barricading themselves against the Muslimin in their fortress. The Byzantines used ships to fight the Muslims and prevent them from approaching their cities. They fired arrows at the Muslims to prevent them getting near the river. Then they fled in their ships towards Alexandria, but those who stayed in the fortress quickly surrendered to the Muslimin, and the Muslimin entered them victoriously. They spent a number of days in mop-up operations against the enemy, and Amr sent his commander Shariq ibn Sumay to pursue the fleeing Byzantines. When he met them, he had only a few soldiers with him, so the Byzantines' hopes were raised and they surrounded him. He sought protection from them in a hill that later became known as the Hill of Shariq. He sent word to Amr asking him for reinforcements, and as soon as the Byzantines realized that the reinforcements were on the way, the Muslims they fled. At Sultais, 6 miles to the south of Damanhur, the second encounter between Amr and the Byzantines took place. There was a fierce battle in which they were defeated and fled. It is most unfortunate that these battles, in which the Muslims fought with limited numbers against forces that were vastly superior to them in terms of both numbers and equipment, and which lasted for a number of days, get no more than a few lines or a few words from the Muslim historians, whereas they devoted dozens of pages to the battle of Al-Qadisiyah, Yarmouk, and Nahawand. One of these battles which have made, or which our Arab sources did not cover properly, was the Battle of Kirion, which was the last of this chain of fortresses that stretched from Babylon to Alexandria. The Byzantine commander Theodore had barricaded himself there, and a fierce battle that lasted for more than 10 days took place. In spite of that, Ibn Abdul Hakam does not say more than these few words about it. Then they met in Kirion and fought there for more than 10 days. Abdullah ibn Amr was in the forefront, and the flag bearer that day was Wardan, the freed slave of Amr. Amr offered the fear prayer that day, and then Allah granted victory to the Muslims. The Muslims killed a huge number of the mushrikeen and chased them as far as Alexandria. There are reports of the heroic deeds of Abdullah ibn Amr and Wardan, the freed slave of his father during that battle. At the time of the Muslim conquest, Alexandria was the capital of Egypt and the second city of Byzantine Empire after Constantinople. It was also the foremost trading city in the world. The Byzantines understood the seriousness of a Muslim takeover of the city and were concerned about that. Heraclius said, if the Arabs seize Alexandria, that will signal the end of Byzantine rule. The historical narrators claim that Heraclius prepared himself to go out to Alexandria himself to lead the fight against the Muslimin. But when he had completed his preparations, Allah caused him to die. Thus Allah sufficed the Muslims against him. The Byzantine state was thrown into turmoil after the death of Heraclius, when he was succeeded by his two sons, Constantine and Heraclius II. The Empress Martina, the mother of Heraclius, also played a part in ruling. Constantine died in a mere 100 days after the death of his father, which caused fingers to be pointed at the empress, who wanted her son to be the sole ruler. A revolution broke out against her, and the turmoil and civil war continued for several months until Constantinos, the son of Constantine, took control as the partner of his uncle Heraclius. In addition to its huge strong walls and ample defenses, Alexandria also enjoyed a unique defensive location. To the north, it was protected by the sea, where the Byzantines held complete sway at the time. The lake of Maryut protected it. The lake of Yarmouk of Maryut, protected the city to the south because crossing it was very difficult. It is, if not possible. At that time, one of the branches of the Nile, which was known as Naza'ata Ban, encircled the city to the west. Thus, there was only one route to the city from the east, namely the road which connected it to Kiryon. The siege lasted for several months, which made Amr fear that his troops may become tired or start to despair of ever defeating the enemy. So he decided to send his troops through the delta area and the villages of Upper Egypt. The length of Alexandria's siege also caused the Caliph Umar to worry, and he started to entertain doubts about the soldiers' readiness to sacrifice themselves and their initiative. He thought that this might be because of some sins that they had committed. He explained that in a letter to Amr ibn al-As, in which he said, "I am very surprised at how long it is taking to conquer Egypt, as you have been fighting for the last 2 years, and unless it is because of some sins that you have committed or you have started to love this world as your enemy does. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu only grants victory to people who are sincere. I am sending to you 4 individuals, meaning Zubayr and his companions, and I have told you that each one of them is equivalent to 1,000 men as far as I know, unless something has changed them. When you receive this letter of mine, address the people and urge them to fight their enemy, encourage them to be patient and to have the right intention. Give these 4 men the position of leadership. Tell the people that they should all attack as one under their leadership, and let that be at noon on Friday, for that is a time when divine mercy descends, and it is a time when prayers are answered. Let the people beseech Allah Jalla Jalaluhu and seek Him Jalla Jalaluhu for victory over their enemies." When Amr received the letter, he gathered the people together and read it to them. Then he called those 4 men and appointed them as leaders before the people. He ordered the people to purify themselves and pray 2 rakahs, then to turn to Allah Jalla Jalaluhu and ask Him for victory. They did that, and Allah granted them victory. It was narrated that Amr ibn al-As consulted Maslama ibn Mukhalad al-Ansari and said, "Advise me about fighting these people." Maslama said, "I think that you should choose a man who has knowledge and experience from among the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and put him in charge of the people. Then he should be the one to initiate and take care of the fight." And Amr asked, "Who should that be?" He said, "Ubadah ibn Samit." Amr summoned him, and when he came close, he wanted to dismount from his horse, but Amr said to him, "I urge you not to dismount. Give me your spear." He handed it to him, and Amr took off his turban and tied it on the spear, and he appointed him as the leader of the fight against the Byzantines. Allah granted him victory, and Alexandria was conquered at his hands that same day. Inshallah, we will stop here on page number 323. Apparently there is a good 75 pages left before we begin the era of Sayyidina Uthman bin Affan, which may Allah Ta'ala accept it from us in everything that we are doing for him and for him alone, and as we are remembering the way of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's example. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik wa tabaraka ismu rabbik wa ta'ala jadduk wa la ilaha ghayruk wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.